Scranton Confidential, the Karen Reed murder trial, starts right now.
As the fallout of the mistrial continues, we're taking a look back at the case as it was presented to the jury some time ago. But first, we want to update you on some news we got just a little while ago. We've learned that a disciplinary hearing for Michael Proctor will take place on this coming Monday. It will determine his work status amid an internal affairs investigation. During the trial, we learned Proctor sent vulgar and demeaning text messages about Reed. Just hours after the trial ended, Proctor was transferred from the Norfolk County District Attorney's Office to a troop in South Boston. Police say he is currently getting paid but is not actively working. We've asked Proctor's lawyer for comment but have not heard back yet. Good evening. I'm Glenn Jones. JC has the night off. As the fallout of the mistrial continues, we're looking back at the case as it was presented to the jury to determine how we got here. Let's start with the prosecution's opening statement. In his opening statement, Norfolk County Assistant DA Adam Lally gave the jury an outline of the Commonwealth's case against Karen Reed.
So what my intent here is to provide as much of a roadmap as I can.
Lally started with the weather.
One little difference when it came to that particular day of January 28th and the 29th is the weather.
That set the scene for testimony from police on their investigation and evidence collection.
We decided we were going to process the scene with a leaf blower.
Blood drops were secured into 6 solo cups. We did the best that we could with the situation, with the weather.
Massachusetts State Police troopers testified to finding shards of plastic and glass around the crime scene, days, even weeks after the snow melted.
All those items were located on the grass portion of the yard.
It's listed as broken drinking glass that was about 6 to 8 feet off the into the yard.
Troopers on the stand say the investigation on the front lawn was impacted by the snow, and during cross-examination, we learned the investigation did not make its way inside the home, just feet away.
We did not secure the home as a crime scene.
I have evidence that he was outside, but I don't have anything putting him inside the residence.
Another key part of the Commonwealth's case was testimony from those that were with Reed in the hours around the discovery of O'Keefe's body in the snow, including first responders and others at the scene.
I hit him. She repeated it. She said, do you think I hit him? Do you think I hit him? And I said, no, I don't think you hit him. I think you probably hit something.
The Commonwealth also highlighted relationship tensions in the weeks, even months prior to O'Keefe's death.
In the month or so leading up to Mr. O'Keefe's death, the relationship soured.
I don't know. He hooked up with another girl on vacation. And as we were walking out, the defendant planted a kiss on me, not like a friend.
In the final days of the Commonwealth's case, voicemail messages were introduced that revealed a possible argument between the couple hours before O'Keefe's death.
John, I'm telling you, he is. Nobody knows what he wants.
Other witnesses called early in the trial described a happy couple on the night of January 28th, just hours before Reed allegedly hit O'Keefe with her SUV.
They were affectionate toward each other, loving toward each other, and to the point where my wife even made a comment, why are you not like that with me?
She started by saying how much she admired him.
As the night continued and the bar closed, the group headed to the home of Boston police officer Brian Albert. According to the prosecution, Reed got behind the wheel of her SUV with O'Keefe in the passenger seat, and they made their way to 34 Fairview Road.
Different people from within the pickup and different people from within the house observed that Lexus SUV in one location, pull up a little bit further, and then pull up a little bit further till it's in the area of that fire hydrant, of that flagpole, where Mr. O'Keefe is located.
I saw a dark SUV.
Somebody referenced that there was another vehicle out front. We just assumed that was obviously John and Karen.
Witnesses who were inside the home say the SUV left without the couple going inside.
They see the vehicle out front, they see the vehicle pull away, and they just assume that they left.
John O'Keefe and Karen Reed never entered my house.
Expert witnesses analyzed cell phone and vehicle data they say could point to a pedestrian crash.
What, if any, type of collision is that data set consistent with, and what?
Yeah, there's a point there where it appears to be consistent with a pedestrian strike.
The cause of death was due to blunt impact injuries of the head and hypothermia.
According to expert testimony, DNA evidence from a hair found on the back of Reed's SUV appears to link O'Keefe to the rear right taillight.
I observed an apparent hair on the rear quarter panel about here. And I also noted some pieces of glass on the rear bumper.
A small portion or the hair was put into a tube, and then it went through that DNA extraction.
The DNA profile was interpreted as a 3-person mixture, including male DNA. So in this case, that would be very strong support for inclusion.
Joining us live tonight is Dean of the Massachusetts School of Law, Michael Coyne. All right, Michael, you just heard an overview of the prosecution's case based solely on the framework of the opening statement. When you look back at the Commonwealth's case retrospectively, we haven't even touched on Trooper Proctor yet or the inverted Sallyport video. Do you think the police investigation was of the caliber to get a unanimous guilty verdict?
Not as presented, absolutely not. When we looked at it, every early witness seemed to give as much to the defense as they did to the prosecution. And that has to be fixed if, in fact, they intend to move forward as they've said. I don't think we need half of the evidence of the witnesses at the Waterfall Bar. I think they ought to move it much faster and focus on the key points here is that they were drinking heavily. The driving conditions were incredibly sloppy, as was the conditions that we were working with. And that leads to deadly consequences. And I think next time they have the opportunity to get a do-over here. And you may see a better witness who can tie the collision of the vehicle to him and his death, because the experts did not, to anyone's satisfaction, achieve that degree that we need for beyond a reasonable doubt. So they could potentially bring in another expert who can do better with respect to showing that the car struck the John O'Keefe and caused his death. And I think they have to. You still are stuck with Trooper Proctor, but you don't have to call him. Let the defendant call him if that's what they choose. I think we should see a much streamlined case next time.
Well, when we do fold Michael Proctor into the conversation, as you know, he has this status hearing on Monday. We don't know ultimately what happens to his career with state police. But by the time the next case comes around, does his attachment to this case make it more difficult for the Commonwealth to get a victory?
Without a doubt. We had said that at the time of his original testimony, and the text messages were introduced. It makes it difficult. It doesn't make it impossible if you can try and fix the other holes that are still existing in the Commonwealth's case, because it's not just Trooper Proctor. He may be an easy target, but you've got the evidence collection in solo cups. You've got a leaf blower being used at the crime scene where there are clearly bodily fluids that they're trying to collect. Pieces of the glass potentially are scattered around and lost. You've got very, very sloppy police work. That's not the Norfolk County District Attorney's fault, but it needs to be addressed in the next trial so that you don't have the same issues with respect to the jury being hung.
Okay, Michael Coyne, stick around. When we come back, we'll take a closer look at Reed's defense. We're back with an overview of Karen Reed's defense. A reminder, the prosecution is the side with the burden of proof, meaning the defense just needs to highlight reasonable doubt. J.C. Monahan shows us what that looked like in this trial.
Karen Reed was framed. Her car never struck John O'Keefe. She did not cause his death. And that means that somebody else did.
Those were the first words defense attorney David Yannetti said to the jury. He immediately tried to place doubt in their minds before honing in on several key aspects of the Commonwealth's case.
You will learn, in short, that the police did no real investigation of this case, and you will question why.
Over the course of 9 weeks, Reed's defense team utilized their cross-examination of the prosecution's nearly 70 witnesses. Both Canton Police and State Police took the stand, and they were asked about the scope of their investigation.
Did you ever investigate the foyer area or any other part of the house for evidence of a fight?
The only area I was able to observe at that point, everything appeared to be in order.
But you didn't search the rest of the house for a fight, Lieutenant. That's all I'm asking.
No, I wouldn't have had probable cause to do so.
A large part of the Commonwealth's case relied on the damage to Karen Reed's back passenger side taillight on the morning of January 29th.
I told him that the taillight was cracked.
It's actually completely missing.
Yeah. And I believe in one of the reports, one of the many reports, it will say that I said it was cracked and missing pieces.
That tail light was not completely damaged. It was cracked and a piece was missing, but not completely damaged.
Reed's attorneys would later point to surveillance video showing Reed backing up into O'Keefe's car. They say this was when her taillight was damaged, not from hitting John O'Keefe in front of 34 Fairview Road several hours earlier, as the prosecution suggests. The next question the defense raises is about John O'Keefe's injuries.
Would you agree that John O'Keefe's injuries, or lack thereof, are inconsistent with having been struck by a vehicle?
I would say it's likely and unlikely at the same time, depending on the position of the body. They're not the classic pedestrian injuries that we observe, no.
The medical examiner testified for the prosecution. Later, the jury would hear from medical experts called by the defense, who supported the ME's findings and elaborated further.
If you're hit by a vehicle, or whichever part of your body is hit, if it's a significant impact at all, you're going to get bruising, and we don't have any bruising here. So that does not look to me at all remotely like an impact from a motor vehicle.
I believe that these injuries were sustained by an animal, possibly a large dog, because of the pattern of the injuries.
Another question brought by the defense: when did John O'Keefe end up in the front yard of 34 Fairview?
And folks, you will learn that the timing is important.
According to a digital forensics expert for the defense, his cell phone was outside just before 12:30.
So the first one right to the driveway was at 12:24 and 28 seconds.
Witnesses for the prosecution testified to leaving the home between 1 and 2 a.m., not long before the defense says Jennifer McCabe placed a Google search on her phone.
You see this first search that says hostile to dying cold?
I do.
What's that time?
2:27.
The defense would once again point to timing when calling another one of their witnesses, a Canton snowplow driver who plowed around Fairview Road the night in question.
When you made that first pass by that residence at 2:45 in the morning, sir, what, if anything, did you see on the front lawn in the area of the flagpole?
I saw nothing.
What time was it, to your best estimate, in terms of when you would have approached Fairview and Cedar Crest again?
3:15 to 3:30.
What, if anything, unusual did you see at that point?
At that point, I saw a Ford Edge on the side of the road.
Where was it parked on the side of the road?
In front of the Albert's house, by the flagpole.
You will learn that the police have done zero investigation to discover whose Ford Edge that was. You'll learn that members of the Albert family drove Ford Edges.
We know the Albert family owned the home at 34 Fairview Road at the time of O'Keefe's death. The defense argued the family's connections, acquaintances, and friendships played a large role in the investigation on their front lawn.
Sure, the owners of the house will receive some correct?
Correct.
And your answer was one word, correct?
Yes.
What was that word?
Nope.
You will reasonably doubt their case because Karen Reed was framed, and the evidence shows that.
NBC 10 legal analyst Michael Coyne is back with us. Michael, the defense did not have to prove there was a police cover-up. Of course, they brought it up in their opening and closing statements. But when you look back on this case, do you think that they presented enough evidence to make you believe there was some kind of conspiracy here?
They presented enough evidence to create the reasonable doubt that most of us thought, because of the case they presented, they would have a relatively quick not guilty verdict. So whether they have presented enough to convince someone of the broad conspiracy, that's not their burden in a case like this. As JC pointed out, and as you said just moments ago, they don't have the burden of proof. All they have to do is create reasonable doubt. And most of us thought that they had done just that by arguing the police misconduct, the sloppy investigation, and potentially that the injuries were not consistent with the car as much as they would be consistent with a dog scratching him or making those injuries.
We heard so much about this parallel federal investigation during this trial. Can you help our viewers understand what might happen next in that federal process?
Well, if in fact that they have decided to move forward and seek indictments, there may be individuals who are indicted as a result of their investigation and the testimony and evidence that they received. It doesn't necessarily have to be absolutely directly related to the Karen Reed case. They may have discovered other misconduct. They may have discovered misconduct with respect to the witnesses in this case. And if they did, then at some point we should see an indictment. At some point, I hope, because it's cast such a shadow over this entire case, that at the minimum we receive a report so that people can look at it and realize whatever it has to say so that we can actually understand why this unusual federal investigation was undertaken during a pending criminal case.
That federal investigation, Michael Proctor, there are so many threads to follow, Michael, even before we get to the retrial. So we hope you'll stay close. We're going to need your analysis.
I will. And we have the Turtle Boy case coming relatively soon, and that could reveal more. That could reveal more information as well, Glenn.
Okay. NBC legal analyst Michael Coyne, thank you. One of the tragic outcomes of a mistrial is the delay of justice for the victim's family. Still ahead on Canton Confidential, what we learned about John O'Keefe from his loved ones who took the stand. Tonight, we've revisited the first trial of Karen Reed, a finance professional accused of murder. We've learned that many people have differing opinions about this case, but one thing is true across the board. The justice system has not yet held anyone accountable for John O'Keefe's death. His loss especially impactful given his family's previous hardships. The world knows John O'Keefe as a proud Boston police officer of 16 years. The people who knew John intimately call him Johnny and say the job he loved most was being legal guardian to his niece and nephew.
Johnny moved into their house in Canton, the original house that Steve and Kristen had bought. He moved in with the kids there.
John's older sister, Kristen, tragically died from an illness, and just months later, her husband died too. Their kids were orphaned. A little girl aged 6 at the time, her brother aged 3. The O'Keefe family, in court every day of the trial, was devastated.
My wife and I had talked about having the kids come live with us. We had 2 small children at the time. 3 and 8 months were my children. We didn't have a large enough house to take on 2 other children, so my brother stepped in, moved into the house in Canton, and raised them for 8 years.
From 2013 up until his death, John O'Keefe loved the kids as his own and would constantly show up for his friends' families too.
We were close. We did a lot of stuff together, pick up the kids, drop the kids off.
Him and my husband would always do the games. The kids used to call them my 2 dads. It was like they had a lot of fun together.
John's friend Michael Camerano on the stand said he'd go to the O'Keefe's household every Friday night. He knew John and all of his personality traits.
Everything was very tidy. When you walked in the door into the house, to the left, you put your shoes, your coats would be hung there.
And as far as shoes were concerned, is that something that you wore inside the house or not?
He'd rather you not.
That day in January, John and Michael both had something to celebrate. The kids got school acceptance letters, a proud dad moment.
We were just congratulating the girls, talking about how good it's going to be, different school, and just really excited for the girls.
Another close friend testified later in the trial, Laura Sullivan. She dated John's friend Pat, became pregnant with Pat's child, but in 2013, Pat took his own life.
Immediately following that, John never really left my side, as a support system.
John would become godfather to Laura's son, another way John O'Keefe stepped up for his friends' families, for his own family. He was 46 years old. Thank you for joining us for Canton Confidential tonight and throughout the trial. This is our last Canton Confidential for now, but our coverage will continue as this case develops throughout the weeks and months ahead. In the meantime, you can catch up on previous editions of our show on our website. I'm Glenn Jones. Have a good night.